Good afternoon. Welcome to the December meeting of the Lynchburg Electoral Board. Thank you all very much for being here with us. We have several business items to cover, and I also want to let you know that we had the closed meeting just prior to this personnel matters. That's all that we dealt with at the same time. I am David Newmeyer. I'm the chair of the Electoral Board. To my left is Steve Trout, full vice chair.
Thank you.
And Dan, would you introduce yourself and that?
Sure, I'm Dan Pence, I'm the general registrar, and here is Julie and Nancy, and they're my deputy registrars.
Thank you. Next, we'll continue with the pledge of allegiance. Please stand and get ready. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any additions for the agenda? Talk about under new business, we want to talk about the holiday schedule for the registrar's office because of some of the conflicting election. Thanks, Steve. I also want to talk about the check-in process for the students. I lost right over the comments for the chair. I don't always have them, but I have used on it. I wanted to let you know that my term as the electoral board ends on December 31st of this year. I'm filling a term that belongs to another board member who's on in March, and I was asked to fill out the remainder of her term that I've done. And I have not asked for an extension for another term. I want to ask the Democratic Party chair to nominate somebody else. I've greatly enjoyed all of my time on the board, which stretches back better part of 7 years now, and with this, my current colleagues, but I have greatly enjoyed working with them. I need to note that I'm still in disagreement with the manner in which the board handled the transition of considering reappointment versus replacement of the entire registrar. I don't think we follow proper city policy, and there are also constitutional issues that as well. Those are in litigation right now, which seem to be stuck in the fourth circuit court of appeals, and they're not moving very quickly. So those have yet to be resolved. Where that put us with the election process this year, we did hire a new registrar, and we have new deputies as well. And it's been, I think, a lot of work for the electoral board as well as the staff, to speed to decide on allocation of duties. And my Republican colleagues love to train, which is a good thing. I think it's great to have electoral board more members more involved in training. And for me, it's been a large commitment, much more than in past years that I've served on the board, and it's had an impact on my day job. I have a full-time day job, and it's prevented me, I think, from fulfilling all the duties I should fulfill this year. So that's the reason why I decided to not ask him to be appointed for another term on the elected board. But I wish my colleagues at the table here and the staff that, and to the extent that I can be of assistance after I go off the board, I'd be glad to do that. Those are my comments from the chair. Okay, we'll go on and we have two additions to the agenda, so I'll ask for approval of the agenda as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Ayes have it. We have minutes of our October 26th meeting. Are there any changes to those minutes? Hearing none, if there's no objection, I'll consider those adopted by the board as proposed. Here's the announcement section of the agenda, and does our registrar have any announcements?
I'll have just, well, two announcements, which will be in my registrar's report. You'll see later. First announcement is that the office will be closed 25th and 26th of December for Christmas holiday, as per the city holiday schedule. And the second announcement is that we received word today from the Department of Elections that we will be having a dual primary coming up in March.
Would you explain that?
Sure. So it means that both the Republican and the Democratic Party have filed to have a primary, and they have candidates that they've filed to have a primary. So we'll be having a primary on the same day, but for both parties, and that'll be part of our election process coming up in March 5th.
Thank you. Next item is registrar report. Report in addition to we have anyone online, by the way?
We do have one person online, one person on Zoom. Okay, registrar's report for this month. A good amount of material here today, so I will go through it as expeditiously as possible, but obviously we'll take your questions as we go. So table of contents hasn't really changed. It's going to be basically the same summaries that we often go through, but obviously the detail will be for this month. So here's a chart of the registering counts by locality as of December 6th. So I pulled this report from Verus yesterday. I do this mostly just for informational purposes so that you have the ability to look over this and see how it is. I won't read through all the numbers, but essentially this report gives us a list of active voters per precinct, a list of inactive voters, and then also just breaks out military, overseas, and federal, so that we have a sense of what that looks like. Any questions on this report? Okay, hearing none, I'll go to the next page, which is locality statistics. This is another report that we decided previously in another previous meeting to use to track the question of how changes are happening per month within our precincts. The other previous report doesn't really show us that very well, and actually trying to do a difference between the two reports per month wasn't very accurate. This is a report that's in Verus. I understand it's a very old report. I'm talking to some other registrars. Last time you asked me to see if I could determine what some of these columns meant, and I still, despite asking around, don't know what the income column means. But it turns out that that's pretty much zero all the time. So perhaps that's for something that's not used anymore. The transfer in is going to be from other jurisdictions within Virginia. Change in is going to be just something that's not a transfer in. Same with change out and transfer out. The deceased and felony, I think, are obviously registrar error where there's a problem that the registrar has to fix. Out of state also should be tracking that, although I don't think the numbers here are actually being tracked correctly. But anyway, it gives you a high level view per precinct of what's happening, what's coming in, what's going out. And at the bottom, I've given just a kind of a summary total, just did some addition down the columns. So you have an idea about how things are moving. Any questions on this report?
So then the lower right corner of ending total, that is not a total of additional or difference in voters. It's a
Correct.
number of transactions.
Yes, that is correct. Sorry, that is, even though it says ending total, that's ending total per precinct, and it's not calculating the total number of voters, it's calculating total number of transactions. That's correct.
Well, let's look at 101.
Sure.
Re-registered 15, new 45, transfer in 33. Whatever. Shade in, shade out, transfer out. You see, felony, I think your ending total 56 would be the net.
Correct. That's net. That's a net, actually. Correct.
88 would be total net.
That's correct.
Increase.
That is correct.
Just transactions, it's actually gained 388 voters.
Yes, that's what this means.
Okay.
So when you say transactions, yeah, so it's the net. That's a more accurate description of that number. Yes, that's correct. Okay, any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
388 voter.
Yes, so the ending total is the column of the net coming across from all that row. And so it's the net at the bottom.
Right.
So that's the column heading is a little, I'll see if I can adjust that for next report because it's a little misinformed. All right, my next report, statistical report, is what we do for the National Voter Registration Act. And this essentially just tracks registrations that take place across the month. You'll notice that we just call out a couple of numbers here. The election day SDR was obviously, fairly big because we actually registered people on election day using the same day registration.
I want to ask you to
Sure.
fill out abbreviations.
Sure. So same day registration, right? Election day, same day registration process. So that was, obviously higher in November because we had an election and we were registering people on election day. The other number that maybe is a little bit higher than it had been was the number from the DMV. So the reason for this is, and it's a little lower last month. The reason for that is because we were ceasing registering new voters after the 17th in October, and then we closed books at that point, and then we reopened books after the election. So that's why this past month was higher and the previous month was lower. Those are the only things I see jumping out at me on this report. Maybe of note. Any other questions?
Now this one is transactions, am I correct?
This one is,
This 22,000 would be total transactions, because DMV would include change of address, change their driver's license information, and that type of thing.
right,
That's not actually an increase in total number of voters.
correct.
Transactions, corrected information, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, 2,300 means we process 2,300 voter registration applications. And as you know, voter registration applications are used not only to register new voters, but also to update information, on a voter's record. So if you have an address change or something that takes place at the DMV, that passes through to us, and then we process it as a voter registration application. Any other questions? Okay, let's go over to our department budget. So we have 3 pages here. First 2 pages are the registrar's budget, and going over onto the 3rd page, we have the electoral board's budget, all kind of rolled up under the department, but under separate categories. Calling out, I guess, probably the biggest thing on here that I think is something to note is that we are spending year to date about 20,000 on temporary personnel. And that's because of early voting and other things that we've done in the office. There's another allocation of funds that we'll get to in the next page, which is actually election officers. So this is a breakout for the early voting and what we've done in order to do, some absentee balloting. Some amount is in there. But that's about where we're at for that particular number on this page. And the next page, you will see the electoral board component of the election day, and that actually is if you look under column next to the right column down under temporary personnel services, you'll see that number, which is 25,959, and that also is the amount of money we pay out for our election officers on election day. Miscellaneous contractual services covers things that we pay for from our vendors. So things like upgrades to software on our scanning equipment, the ballots that we purchase from them, and some other items like that. And that's what's in the number below that, which is 28,816.71. So questions on this? I'll go to the next page, I guess. I don't think there's anything important or note on that page. Only one other note I will make is that if we go down to the bottom right, the second to the most right column, you'll see that we're running at about 55% of our overall budget for the year. That's probably what we expect, given that we, have had an election. Now, since we're having, multiple elections this year, we'll have to keep an eye on that. But the city council has actually allocated more money to us in the event that we need it. So we'll have to see, if we run over 100% by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year in June, end of June.
My understanding is the city council at their last meeting made a final ruling for that $100,000 increase. It's correct, and it's not included in this.
That is correct.
Next month, numbers and percentages will be different.
So possibly. So I'll need to talk to finance, because what I was told before from finance was it would show up if we needed it. So I don't know if they're going to just go journal entry into us because they've done their final approval, or if they'll wait until we need it. But if we need it, I've been told it's going to be there, right?
I could be wrong, that. But my understanding was that we were getting the total $100,000, and if we needed it prior to the final approval, we would be able to spend it. So
Okay.
there's two different ways, and I can't tell you for sure which one's correct, but when you talk to them, you can find that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be actually talk to Megan probably tomorrow on a couple of things. So, okay. Any other questions on this, the budget? Okay. I'm going to go and talk about absentee balloting this year because we, for the first time, did do a vendor. But I wanted to kind of give you the overall kind of viewpoint of how things went with absentee balloting. So on the left-hand side here, I have a chart. I felt it was probably the most instructive to go ahead and do kind of a cumulative totals over time. So I know it's very hard to see back there, but along the bottom here, I actually have dates as to how things went. And as you can see, things tend to move a little bit of bumps and surges. The reason for that is, well, twofold. One is because we send out waves of ballots as we get more requests in. So our initial send is everybody who's requested a ballot, an absentee ballot, by the 22nd, in this case, of September, we send everybody out that ballot. But then after that, we still get, ongoing people coming in and saying, hey, by the way, I want an absentee ballot. So it bumps that number up a little bit, and you'll see how that looks at the top of the chart, the orange line. And then the blue line is how it came back to us. So, and you can see, by the way, there's a chunk of gap between what was sent and what was brought back. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through some of the statistics here. But that was how it flowed all the way through the end of our cycle. And I want to make a note that the end of our cycle actually was after election day. If you got about back to us by the 13th of November, during our canvass, closing up of canvass, and it was postmarked by the 7th, it was included in canvass's count. If it came after that, and we did get some after that, it could not be included in canvass's count. So one of the takeaways for me from all of this, just at a high level, I'm not satisfied with how the postal system really handles our absentee ballots, even though it's marked as a election mail and it's supposed to be expedited. My experience in talking to other registrars, their experience is that this is not always the case, and they just like we will get late ballots. And I saw some ballots that certainly should have been coming in under the deadline, but didn't get there by the deadline. From it was marked election day or a little before in terms of the postmark, but it didn't actually show up so we could process it until after the final day. So just something to be aware of is that absentee balloting does have a bit of a risk to it, in that just because you put them in the mail on the right time, the post office may or may not deliver it as expeditiously as would be good. So I just to give us some statistics, you can look over more toward the middle there. We ballot statistics. We sent out a total of 3,198. We received back 2,083, about 65% return. I did want to do a little bit of analysis on our cost. So we used the vendor's permit on the way out, and they got us down to about 50 cents, a piece, for about $1,364 and change. And then we also sent out, the other ballots you see at the top, that orange line, we sent out more, and that was about at the first class rate, because we had to stamp them with ourselves, and that was how that went. Our total outbound cost was $1,619.64, which means we were about 51 cents per piece. On the return, however, it was actually not so good. So one of the things that I discovered as we worked through this, and it was told differently by various people, but this is the reality. They actually charge you additional postage for business return mail, which is what we needed to do in order to actually use the vendor. We had to have a business return mail permit, which we filed for and got paid for. But they charge you on a higher per piece rate, which is $177. And so you have to do a permit and you have to pay per piece. And so with the cost of the permit, our return cost was about $33.70.90, and the per piece cost was about $188. So total postage came out to $4,990.54. That's what we paid in postage for this year. And I did a comparison. If we did just a first class of sending everything out and bringing everything back, if we marked every ballot with 2 stamps, essentially, we'd be closer to $3,500, just under $3,500. So that's something to think about for our new, another round, is what we, how we can maybe adjust that cost or fix that cost. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. Duplicate sent, we actually, because of some problems that Verus had, they have a PAB auto updates, which is what they call their way that they update every day when you get new applications in. That process broke for a few days during that critical period after 9/22. And so as a result, we sent out about 19 duplicates. We recovered about 12 of those. And there was only one person that attempted to vote twice. I think it was an error on their part. They were older, about 88 years old. And I think they simply forgot they got one ballot and sent it back. Now, how do I know that? It's because within Verus, you mark every ballot as it comes back. So if someone comes and sends a second ballot back, you already have them marked as having been sent. And so it's not easy to cheat the system and vote twice. So we flag that for that particular voter. Yeah.
So in that example, the second ballot.
That is correct. Yeah. So second ballot's not counted because the person has already voted and we've recorded them as voted. And that's why when you go to early voting, you get recorded as having voted. When you send an absentee record, you get recorded as having voted. And then if you show up on election day, the poll workers have that information in the poll book, and therefore they will tell you, you can't vote regular, maybe you vote provisional, just in case you think there's an error there, but it keeps people from voting twice. So we had other ballots that came in absentee. We had about 66 approximately needing cure. We cured about a third of those, around 24. We also had a number of undeliverable ballots, and this goes to my point about the mail system. I was still getting back undeliverable ballots even after the 13th of November. Not a lot, but I continued to get back undeliverable ballots all the way through the cycle. So there's a total of about 115. That just means basically that the address that we had on file couldn't find the voter. So we got the ballot back. We had about 293 people use the drop box, which is good. If you do get an absentee ballot, we encourage people to use the drop box because that means they're not charging us postage on the way back. So if you're in town and you get an absentee ballot and you don't mind swinging down to the office to drop in the drop box, that saves the office money on postage. But we did get also, like I mentioned here, about 52 ballots that were late. That is, they came after the deadline. And there's percentages numbers next to that. So,
Dan,
yes.
could you explain what ballots needing cure means and what how does
Sure.
that work?
Yeah, so what cure means is this: with every election, whether you do an absentee ballot, you have to follow the procedure for submitting that absentee ballot. In prior years, you had to have a witness signature on the absentee ballot. This year, they decided that was more cumbersome and more difficult, but they did require every voter to put down the last 4 digits of the social security number and to put down their year of birth. So if you sent back your ballot and you didn't put that down, or for example, you didn't put your address down, or you didn't put, there's a couple of fields you have to fill in, address, and you had to sign the bottom. So if you didn't do one of those things right, then the ballot, we can't accept that ballot as being a valid ballot. However, we also are required to reach out to voters and make sure that if they didn't realize they messed something up or something wasn't right, that they get a chance to fix that. So our process was, in the early stages of it, we would actually send back the ballot to the voter to have them correct it and ask them to correct it. Sometimes you had to give them a new envelope oath envelope, because you remember the ballot has to go into the oath envelope. They had to send back a second oath envelope because they'd messed that one up so bad they couldn't use it. In some cases, they just forgot to fill some information in. We just asked them to fill it in. In other cases, when we got later toward the cycle, we were concerned that we wouldn't get the mail process was so slow, they wouldn't be able to get people to cure their ballots in time. And so we actually worked with elect. They gave us an affidavit form, which says basically this will be the replacement or the alternative to your oath envelope. And as long as you get this information back to us, we can count your vote. So we were faxing and emailing, and in worst case scenario, mailing these out to people to try and make sure that the vote that we had there in that envelope could be counted and passed on to our CAP team to do the counting. So that kind of explain? Okay. The other thing I should mention, we do have, and this is one of the advantages of going with the postal with a vendor, is that because they mark the ballots with an identification code. I say ballot, it's the return envelope with an identification code. We actually get a file from the post office that says, hey, we received this into the system. That's when they first get this in, on the 22nd in this case. And then they'll say, oh, we checked it in here, and then we passed it to the locality here, and then and I'm just kind of giving you a general idea about the columns, but they also will say, oh, the ballot was sent back. We received it back into the mail system. So the ballot that was associated with that send came back in, and then they'll have something, saying basically they returned it to our office. So that sounds like a great idea, but in practice, I found that data to be very spotty. It wasn't very good. And, it had inconsistencies, like it said that it was received by the voter before it was marked as having been processed by the local post office. So there's some jitter in how they do their process, and it's not so accurate. And talking to some other people who actually worked in the post office before, they did admit to me that the process was a lot more manual than it looked. So what the advantage is, if someone calls me and says, hey, I don't know where my ballot is, what happened to my ballot? I can at least go into this file and say, okay, well, this is what the post office says is about going on with your ballot, right? So at least I have some data to say, but my concern is, you know, I need to tell people as much as I can what the accurate status is. And I wasn't sure that sometimes that data was accurate. So I would caveat it. I would say, this is what the post office is telling me. That's the best I can tell you right now. But it's more than we might be able to tell if we didn't have that file. So just, you know, the positive and the negative of having that mailing file. Okay, any questions on that page? All right, let's talk a little bit more about absentee balloting.
One quick question.
Sure,
The annual permit cost.
yes.
Um,
It was $310 for the
I
permit.
understand that. Do we need to purchase that in order to use Port Orange presses outbound?
No,
That was only for our inbound business request.
correct, that's correct. And to that point, so I'll go on to the next page. To that point, I put on the next page here both their proposal, which we agreed to, and also, you know, basically the invoice that came back for us, so you can kind of see how the numbers look. On the right-hand side, you'll see that we paid them up front for postage. They estimated about a $3,000 payment of postage, which we paid up front, but they actually only used about $1,300. And by the way, this is how I came up with our numbers for how much it cost per piece to go outbound, adding the permit in and adding that. Oh, I'm sorry, that's for the return, but I'm just adding what they showed here for the outbound. And that gives us basically our cost per piece. And they credit us back, obviously, if you look at the right-hand side of that line. So we got that back, what we paid. But of course, that gets applied to the rest of our bill, which is what you see there on the right. So I did complain to them a little bit about this bill and their proposal, because I felt that the proposal wasn't clear enough about exactly what the costs were going to be. So after I kind of complained about it, and also complained about the fact that they charged us for 3 different test decks, because test decks are for the machine, right? You get the test deck, you run it through the machine, you make sure the machine is, you know, in LNA testing that the machine is good. But they did a little switcheroo on us in that they decided that the left justified ballot header wasn't going to work for their system. So they wanted to print a ballot with the ballot header center justified. Okay, that's all fine. But that meant that we had to kind of redo our LNA testing to make sure that that ballot was actually going to work. And then we had asked them, can you please send us a deck of folded ballots? Because we also wanted to make sure that the folding of the ballot didn't impact the LNA testing. So after the 3rd try, they got it the way we wanted it, but they charged us 3 times. So I complained, and they said, okay, fine, we'll give you a $500 credit. So they reduced their bill by $500, a little more than those 3 decks. Now, the other thing I did complain to them about a little bit is that they charged us, which they said they were going to up front, but they charged us $4,000 to do the setup, which is a large chunk of their bill, right? It's nearly half of the bill they charge us. And I suggested to them, based on conversations with other vendors, which you'll see in a moment, that that was a pretty high charge, and that we probably could, they should be able to do better for us than that after they've done at least 1 cycle, because now they know the file format. They're doing the same file format for other jurisdictions. And I asked them if they could consider reducing that one-time setup fee. And they agreed to discuss that in the future. So if we do decide to go back with them again, that becomes a point of conversation to see if we can get them to adjust that number. Just any questions on this so far? I have some comparisons to show on the next slide. Okay. So if we did do a different vendor, you'll see I did on the left-hand side another vendor who asked to give me some numbers. These are not firm numbers because I discussed it with them. They gave me some basic ideas, but this is not something they've committed to in a bid. So just to be aware of that. But you'll notice the election setup charge is much, much less for this particular vendor. And then I also did a bit of a comparison for if we decide to do this all ourselves. I know in the past we've done this ourselves, meaning we've done it out of the office. We've just gone out, printed envelopes, or had envelopes printed for us, and then stuffed all the envelopes, put all the labels on, done all the postage ourselves. You can see a comparison there. So I think this is a number, the number that we're seeing here is probably a good number for a vendor to give us, as well as maybe if we did it ourselves. To be honest with you, the most difficult part about doing it ourselves is really just making sure we have enough people in the office during the right time to go ahead and get all that put out the door. I think that's always been a challenge when we've done it ourselves. When you use automation, you want to be able to get some benefit back from that automation. And that's what we've asked some of our asked our vendor to do, and could ask another vendor to do if we decide to go with somebody else. Any questions on these? Okay. Yeah, sure. Yep, sure.
When do we need to make a decision?
So that's a good question. Our next meeting is in January, right? It's going to be the first Thursday, which is the 5th, the 4th. We have to mail everything out by the 19th, right? So that's the window. Could the vendor do it if we make a decision on the 4th by the 19th? That's really the question we're asking, right? Probably they could do. I don't know. So I'll just look at my deputies to make sure I'm not saying something that's unrealistic. But you're less excited about that timing, right?
Professionally, from our experience with this specific vendor this go round, I think that they would need more time.
Dan, are you ready to make a recommendation tonight?
I wanted to get for this meeting, I wanted to get the firm third-party vendor bid just to compare. Without that in hand, I think the Fort Orange Press wasn't bad, wasn't horrible. It ended up being a little bit more expensive than I anticipated it being. If we can get them to agree to, adjust slightly, then maybe it's just as good to do that as it is to do something else.
Another alternative is we could just hold a special meeting. This issue sometime in December.
We could do that. Okay, so if you want me to try to get another firm proposal, I'd be happy to work on that, see if I get that done for a meeting later in December.
Okay, that's how attractive to you. I'll be trying.
Okay, all right.
And this mailing permit, we pay $310 for that annual fee.
Yes, that's an annual fee. So we still have that permit. We can still use that.
So we can actually, if we did it in-house, we could actually use that on our outbound absentee ballots.
The permit is actually for business reply mail. So it's actually a return mail permit. The way the post office does it is we have to, get an outbound print, and then you have a business mail reply. They have it all broken down into different categories of how you get mail. So this is specific to your business reply. Could we use it again? Yes, we could use it again on the return envelopes, not on the outbound.
We would want to talk about that because the over half of our absentee ballots came back. I don't know how many of them came back by mail, but the cost of that permit was 3 times.
I agree. That was a big concern to me.
May not be a good deal.
So one of the things that I actually thought about was, I have asked the Fort Orange Press if they could do this, is maybe it's just cheaper for them to run the return mail through a postage meter, right? So we would get the bulk discount on the outbound, and then just go ahead and pay the 66 cents per return. That might actually end up being cheaper. My hope was that we would, with the business return mail, we would actually end up reducing our cost, but you really have to have only probably about a third of the return. Like, you just do the math, right? 66 cents versus 177, about a third of the return. And we're getting, go back to the other chart, we're getting 65% or something. And that actually puts the numbers, against us in terms of the cost. So if we did it, we could ask the vendor to go ahead and just give us a 66 cent postage meter or stamp or whatever, and see if that would reduce our cost in the return.
I think it's gonna be 68 cents.
Yeah, I say 66 is, turn of the year, it's gonna be 68. That's right. Okay, any other questions on this analysis? Okay, and my action item to follow up is to go ahead and try and get another bid and talk to the vendor about what they really would do in terms of proposal for this election. And then I'll bring that back to you and we can have another meeting about that item. Okay, November 7th, election results. I hope everyone who is interested in this has actually gone out to the elections website. I put the website on there for you for your convenience. If you haven't gone to it, you can use that on your phone or you can use it on your computer. Just put up the results here just so everyone could see them. This is how it turned out in this 8th district and the 52nd district. We have Mark Peak winning with 52.4% of the vote versus Donna Claire, St. Clair with 47.4% of the vote. An insignificant number of write-ins, as you would expect for this kind of race. Also, 52nd district, Wendell Walker prevailed with 51.5% of the vote versus Jennifer Woofter, who had 48.4%. The big race here, this election turned out to be the write-in for the Soil and Water Conservation Director. And the Soil and Water, this has been true in other elections, but the Soil and Water Director, Conservation Director, often does not have a party, sponsored candidate. And that was the case here as well. What it means is that you have people, it's a write-in only ballot, and it's a vote for two. That means you have two, offices, and they're both put on the same label within the ballot, and you vote two for two, potentially, if you wish to. So in this particular case, we purport, just so you know, anybody who gets more than 10% of the vote, we're required to report back to the Department of Elections, because that's the threshold of actually making sure that you put their name as someone who was voted for. So we have Leslie Wilton, who prevailed in this case with 23.5% of the vote. Shepard Landrum also was the second winner with 23.4% of the vote. And other two significant candidates, or candidates who broke the 10% mark, were Robert Flint and Charles Smith, and all the other candidates, and that includes, every other potential people who got their name put in a write-in. That's about 18% of the candidates, 18% of the vote for those. Questions on that? Let's talk about election statistics. Just want to give you just a high level how voting broke out this election cycle. Election day, 11,931. Early voting is about 3,324. Absentee was 1,718. Provisional, that is, counted after election day because of someone submitting provisional ballots, 216, for a total of 17,189. You can see the percentages to the right. So election day is just under 70%. Early voting is about 20%. Absentee voting is about 10%. Provisional is 1%. On the right-hand side, I have a breakout of the turnout per precinct. So in case you want to know how your precinct did with turnout, those are the actual number of registered voters. In the second column, third column is the number of people who voted, and then the percentage is just those two numbers compared. Overall, at the bottom, you'll see we have about 30% of the electorate voting, or sorry, I didn't say electorate, 30% of the registered voters voting in this past election. Any questions on that? Okay, let's talk about after action items. I think David is going to add has added one to our agenda for a little later, but I wanted to talk about what items I feel like we should be thinking about in order to improve our process. One of the things that was, a factor in this election, or a fact in this election, was that our election night results were reported later than usual. And this is a statement that we posted on our website at the beginning of Canvas regarding this. Just want to make sure you've all seen this. 2 open seats on the Soil and Water Conservation Board had no candidates named. Therefore, over 7,000 write-in votes were cast. Collecting the total number of write-in votes took precincts longer than normal to report and post. The state software and our software did not fully communicate with each other. Other localities had this problem as well. We've worked with the state, and our numbers from the state website are now up to date. So just in case you didn't see that on our website, we had that posted for your information. So I want to talk about a couple of problems that we had. And this first problem is about, what we just talked about. We had a large number of writing candidates, like we said, about 7,000. It caused the tapes for writing candidates to take much longer than usual to print. So any of you who were actually a chief on that day know that that tape was about what 70 feet long or something like that, and took like an hour, right? You haven't seen nods from chiefs about how long that took to print. And one of the problems was that they got stuck halfway through. Some of them, I don't know, some precincts maybe printed fine, but some of them got stuck halfway through, kind of had to mess with the printer to get it to work. Had vendor, so we were engaged with that problem, making sure that the tapes got printed, because that was a high priority, obviously. So one of the things that ended up happening, because of the printer's tapes were so long, and because the printer images were not very dark, was the electoral board decided to actually do a hand count of all the ballots. So if you like hand counting, if that's your thing, we had a bunch of people who helped the board out to get all that stuff hand counted. And so they hand counted every write-in vote, which meant they had to go into every ballot box and go ahead and grab everyone and do all that, tally everything. And I know the board that was a big effort on not just on the people's part for doing the tallying and the counting, but even for them to kind of roll all that up into a final report. So one of the things that I discussed with the vendor after this pain was that, is there any better way to do this? And so it turns out the vendor does have a software package that allows for a clearer write-in report. So they have a software package that you can take the information from the voting machine and you can put it into this software, and then it will produce a image on a PDF form, ePDF file, as opposed to on this tape being printed by a thermal printer. And on the PDF file, you only get what the image is. You don't have to, you don't have to reprint it and worry about the quality of the printer. You see it much better. And so I know when we talked about this, afterwards, I think both the board's members that saw this, I don't know if Doc, if you saw this or not, but agreed that that image that we were seeing was much clearer. So if we have a large write-in, or expect to have a large write-in candidate in the future, that may be an alternative to actually having to do a hand count or something like that, because it was just easier to see those images. So that's something to think about for another round. Second item we had that was challenging was we had difficulty in staffing our CAP team this time around, because key members were not available for all the sessions because they were sick with the flu. So something you can't really plan for or anticipate. But we met that challenge. We had to pull in some additional people. And the result, though, was that CAP was running late on election day, trying to get everything done with the absentee voting, and the early vote tabulation couldn't start until CAP was done. And so it got a little delayed. So going forward, I think we need to make sure we have both additional people on CAP, because we had a CAP team that we thought was adequate. The size was adequate, but we maybe need to make it staff it a little bit larger. And we also, I think we need to schedule more pre-processing sessions. I think Betty was an advocate of that early on. And so we'll try and make sure that happens in this coming, whenever we do this again, in the coming election. And also, I think we'll designate certain members of the CAP team be responsible for making sure early voting tabulation is done just as soon as the polls close. So we don't have a bandwidth problem where we have two things that should be happening simultaneously that get backed up. A third after action item, or fourth, item number 4 here, is the problem we had with the voting reporting system, which the state requires us to use. It doesn't handle write-in races with a vote for 2 very well. The tape results were not really able to be entered directly into the state system, but needed some work to adjust to the state system's limitations. So this caused a delay in reporting as the system initially rejected our tape results. So what we'd like is for the state to allow more user, general registrars and other staff input to the work they do with the vendor. The vendor is called ENR for election night reporting. Ideally, look, in an ideal world, you have a tape, you take the number on the tape, you input it into a system, and it goes ahead and figures everything out. That's what should happen. But the way the software on the scanner, shows the votes and the way they wanted them to be reported was not in sync. So you ended having to do a calculation of the undervotes manually, and that was something we did, but it also slowed everything down in terms of getting things till we understood what their software needed and how to get that reported. Okay, questions on any of that? Okay. And this is just so so you know that elect is aware. I just wanted to put they had an advisory that they put out about the write-in races and about their awareness of some of their problems that they had with the write-in abstracts. So they're aware, and they'll need to work with their vendor to get that sorted out.
I just wanted to make a note of the audience, and when you say the electoral board has people come in to help, they were actually sworn officers of election from each.
Correct.
department to
Yeah.
make sure that they're very balanced.
Yeah.
So they're weighed in above board, just as in the precinct on election day. So, yeah, we did have some friends come in to help, but they were fully trained and according to law.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and since you're going down that path, Julie's reminding me that we made sure we had authorized representatives in both parties also as all part of that. So it was all above board and handled the way it should be. Okay, so I've had some conversations with our ballot scanning vendor, ESO, and the scanning equipment, because it's a little old now, is becoming obsolete. Slowly, it's getting slower and slower, or as the software upgrades come along, it gets slower. That's why, by the way, if you were a chief previously, we would use a closed card, but this time around they told us don't use the closed card because the closed card actually made it even slower. So that's why I had us manually do the close. If you remember the instructions that we gave you to manually do the close, that was the reason, is because they realized that it was going to become intolerably slow for us users. But as the state of the Virginia Department of Election continue to upgrade, and they're going to go to a 2.0 flavor of their requirements, maybe not this year, but maybe starting as early as 2025 or end of 2025, we're going to need to think about our equipment and making sure our equipment can handle the requirements. So our existing equipment is purchased mostly in 2015. It's nearly fully depreciated, about 94% depreciated. We will be fully depreciated, except we actually purchased maybe a couple more machines back in 2020, and they're still going through the depreciation process. It's going to be necessary to upgrade our equipment over the next couple of years. I'd say it's important to plan for that rollout and to budget that, or think about the budget for that now, especially because we're coming up on a new budget cycle where they want us to put in budgets for the next fiscal year. A number of other localities in the state are already in the process of upgrading their ESO ballot scanners. So we're not the only ones facing this challenge, and some other people are actually ahead of us on this track. They've already upgraded some of their equipment. Here is what one scanner looks like. This is a quote from the vendor, and you can see it's about $6,400. That's about 8% more than their last quote in 2015. So I'm not even sure they're keeping up with the rate of inflation, but that's about where it's at. They do come out and do acceptance testing and training, so that's a one-time charge. So that wouldn't apply to every individual unit we would buy. But that's kind of what it looks like, just so you have some awareness of the overall numbers. Ongoing, sorry, go ahead.
How many new scanners would we need?
Well, so we have 18 precincts, so we need 18 precincts plus backups, right? So
And there are at least 2 mobile stations. Oh, no, one over here.
Usually one OVO. In some precincts, we have two. So we've tried to make sure, I think we have on hand like 22, like 22 right now. So we might be getting up to that number in terms of reordering, just in order to make sure we have backups.
So 18%, plus cap, plus early voting rate 20. You have an extra machine that's 21. So your backup. I had heard the number 24 before. So we have 27.
I have to go, yeah, I have to go count that for you. Again, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. For the cap, we are using a high-speed scanner, which is their little high-speed scanner in the laptop. So that we don't need a separate machine for that. We already have that. That will be compatible going forward because the software is all on the laptop. But I'll get you a number when we get closer to actually making the, you know, I'll get you a number of exactly how many we need.
24 times 6,400, 153,000.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's,
we will get this from the city, right?
yeah, so last time we did this, there was actually HAVA money. My understanding is, and we actually got state yeah, I'm sorry, Help America Vote Act is was passed by Congress to help America vote. And one of the things they did was they allocated money to states and then all the way down to localities in order to purchase scanning equipment and other election equipment. So that the last purchase was covered either largely or a good part of it, or maybe all of it, by the HAVA money. And so this time around, we wouldn't have necessarily that money available. We would have to figure out how we would need to budget this ourselves. But to talking with a vendor, this isn't something we would have to do maybe all at once. We could maybe, and this is partly why I raise this issue now, is because we could begin to make purchases of equipment to kind of migrate from the older equipment to the newer equipment over some period, maybe could be even 2 fiscal years before we actually get hit with you know, the states saying, hey, this equipment really doesn't meet the 2.0 standard or whatever the standard is they have at that point. So anyway, just something, I'm not saying we should make a decision today, or if we want to, we can, but this is something you should definitely be aware of. I can get more information. We can take this up again also in this, if we do another meeting about absentee balloting, we can take that up then as well.
Anything that'd be useful to discuss in our city budget first.
And I've actually talked to Matt Marsteller, who's our sourcing person. So I have to talk with him a little bit about the process. If we were purchasing this flat, just starting from scratch, I think it would have to go through a bid process because of the number you were talking about. Because this is an upgrade to an existing equipment that we have, it might not have to do that, but we need to talk with them about that and figure out what the ground rules are. Okay, ongoing projects. List of projects. Just quickly going through this. We did get the grant money available from Homeland Security for our approval for our upgrades to security, the cameras, and the barrier in the registrar's office. However, I'm informed by Piper in emergency management, who was kind of shepherding this grant through, that we still need to now apply again. Now we've been approved, we have to apply again to VDEM, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. So I have to interact with her and find out what else she needs from me, or if she's just something she can do for us before we actually would get the money allocated to us. And the board, I mean, the city council approves this. So that was one step we had to get done. Separation duties document for the electoral board and registrar. I think it's something that we should do like we've done other manuals. So I'd have that on the list if we could look at that. A couple of other items are closed. I just kept them here so we would mark that they were closed. I do have on my list of things to do. We have electronic poll book destruction. I do have permission from elect to destroy them, but I don't want to pay for the whole notebook to be destroyed. It's a laptop essentially. just want to destroy the hard drives, which is what seemed like they require. So we need to take them out and have them sent to someplace or brought to someplace where they can punch a hole in the hard drive. So that's still something that we have to do. Updated ballot scanning equipment, you've just heard me talk about that. And I guess the other thing we're going to talk about today is the relocation of precinct 204. So I'll leave that to your deliberations. And I also wanted to mention that we are interested, like we mentioned, I think in a previous meeting, in getting our page program restarted. Julie and Nancy have gotten some basic start on that, but we'll have more information on that as we go forward. Two announcements, the ones I made before, will be closed December 25th and 26th. And we now know that there will be a dual primary in March. And that's my report.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
When the page is available.
My anticipation is to be able to use them in March. I know that the board had requested previously a couple months ago when I brought it up for me to kind of start that process, but then we had an election. So we paused it to not start this election. I've reached out to a couple localities and asked them about their programs, and I kind of wanted to gather that information. But I'm anticipating that we should be able to start it for March.
Any questions? Dan? I want to congratulate Dan, started work at the beginning of July, actually a little bit before July 1st. There's an enormous amount of information that had to be acquired. A lot of work to develop a new staff, and Dan has put in many overtime hours. And I think it's done a very effective first 5 months. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on the agenda, old business with nothing listed. New business, ESO equipment, purchase of new model. Is that something we've not covered yet?
I gave you some basic information. I do think it's important, like you said, to have a further conversation with the powers that be in terms of the sourcing within the city. With your permission, I think we should take this up if we do another meeting this month to talk about the Fort Orange Press, that we put that on the agenda for that as well. And I'll have more information at that point.
Right. Do support Orange Press, yes, so that's one pending category. I'll respond to the back. And to review that.
Okay, I received from Elect one complaint this election season, and this was filed by a voter who was concerned with something that happened during their children's time voting. So I'll just read you the text of the complaint, which I think we just need to respond to Elect to. I had 2 of my young adult children vote at their precinct today. I informed them that the law does not require them to state their name and address, as long as the name and address is provided in written form. See 24.2-643, citing the code section. Both of my children provide their picture ID with a written name and address. The first incident occurred around 11. The second incident occurred while I was watching from the doorway. Today was the first day my son voted. The woman who checked in my son told him she would not accept just the picture ID. He needed to state his name and address. He asked me to come over. I informed the election officer I was the former registrar, and the law says the voter does not need to state their name and address, and can be provided in written form. I said, you have to state the name back. The chief then allowed my son to be checked in. My daughter was also told her photo ID would not be accepted unless she spoke her name out loud. She felt like she would not be able to vote unless she spoke her name and address out loud. I was told by Ellen Flory from an elect inquiry that a photo ID is acceptable for written form. I thought this had been addressed back in September when the registrar when I had voted. The election officer sent an email to the registrar and that the voter, refused to state my name and address. The chair asked if this was true, and I sent the information regarding 24.2-643. Voters should not feel coerced to state their name and address if the law provides to be both orally or written. So that was the complaint. Here's my proposed response, open for your editing and your review. Our investigation includes reviewing the incident log from the chief who was presiding over the precinct on election day, reviewing the training we gave to election officers, and interviews with the people who were at the precinct that day. We also reviewed the question of what took place with the complainant when she came to early voting with the individuals present at that time. The chief's incident log states in the column for incident, problem, or complaint, Bradley Dean Gibbons preferred to verify his name in writing instead of verbally. His mom, Christine Gibbons, stated the Code of Virginia allows for this. Bradley was checked in and voted. The column labeled resolution says, no incident with Mr. Gibbons noted for info. In our electoral training, we had a slide that advised election officers working the poll books the following. Number one, find them in the poll book. Number two, ask the voter to state their name and address. In our hands-on training, where we had officers of election actually work on the poll book, we expanded this instruction to include the reference to 24.2-643, which allows for voters to present their information in writing. During interviews with the chief and other election officers at the precinct that day, I was unable to confirm the version of events relayed in the complaint, other than the notes taken in the incident log, and to confirm that Ms. Gibbons did enter the precinct at the invitation of the election officer to clarify the son's request. The statement from the election officer who checked Ms. Gibbons in when she came to vote early, voting at the registrar's office, indicates that he accepted her written ID and checked her in without incident.
Any comment? Okay. I don't have any comment. I think we're in agreement.
So I can send this response back to live. Okay.
Next item is process for extending appointments of the current election officer. This is something that we've discussed within the electoral board. Our tradition and history within Lynchburg Electoral Board is to appoint officers of election for 1-year terms. And what we have coming up after a year of challenge in recruiting new officers to serve this year, and then needing to provide a lot of training for the number of new officers we did have. We are now turned around and facing an election process next year of probably 3 election years. We will have the presidential, dual presidential primary in March. We will have congressional primaries in June, and we'll have a general election in November. And it is therefore attractive to continue the current officers of election we have in office as much as feasible and desirable. And so we in discussion do that, and part of our electoral closed session today was to review the evaluations that were turned in by the precinct chiefs following the November election, confirmed that everyone will get it's also the appointment to or extension to, and then the right that we need to have discussion with. So having had that review this afternoon, it's gratifying that so many of the precinct chiefs gave just glowing reviews to all their team members. That the standards seem generally excellent work by our officers of election. But there are a few that we want to discuss further with the officers of election. So that is our proposed process now, is to extend those officers for the rest for 2024. A great value of doing that is not having to recruit them all over again, plus we can don't have to retrain everybody on everything, because those officers during their term of appointment will have received a lot of training from us already. There'll be some new things we have to train on, like dual election, and there may be parts of what was offered this past year that people want to hear again, people need to hear again, but it will be much more targeted training schedule in 2024. So, Steve and Betty, did I give a decent summary of that? Okay. Steve therefore wanted to offer a motion for that extension. So Steve, would you go ahead and do that?
Moved that the appointments of election officers who served satisfactorily during the November 2023 general election and who agreed to continue serving in that capacity be extended until February 28, 2025, with the exception of 5 individuals with whom the board would like to have further discussion.
Betty, you second the motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it, and motion is adopted. Thank you for that. Next item on the agenda is election officer training before the work. Steve or Dan, either of you want to say something like that?
I mean, I guess my commentary is two things. One is we definitely need to have some training about the how a dual primary is done. The second thing is feedback I've gotten from election officers subsequent to the election is that they would still like more a review of the envelopes. I hate to say that because that's everybody's maybe most difficult thing, but a visual representation of the envelopes, seeing them on a table, and then explaining what each one of them does or go walk through. So I think having required training for the things that we need are required, maybe for the dual primary is important, and maybe offering additional training to those who would like to either brush up or refresh their skills or whatever, or see some particular thing in more detail. We should think about how to accommodate that request.
And I have talked to several election officers, particularly the chiefs, and universally, everyone that I've talked to said, can we spread the training out? They would rather have 3 or 4 trainings over the course of the year rather than the all fire boost training we have given them this year. And I would suggest, depending upon how much we need to put into the dual primary training, which from my recollection was not that much, perhaps we could do a 2-part training on one night, where the first part of the training would be the dual primary requirement training that we're required to do, and everyone would attend. And the second part of that training would be a refresher, or however you want to look at it, going back over information that we think is important. That's one option that I think would work, and if it was lecture, we could do it in here in two different nights to give people an option. And then I also think it would be good if we could have the equipment set up downstairs, like we did for the hands-on, and just have certain times when someone will be there who can answer your questions and let people sign up to show up at different times, just so that they can go back through there and make sure that they are very comfortable. And that would include setup and tear down of the OVO, setup and tear down of the OPI, and definitely use of the poll book. So far as the chief's training is concerned, they very much want to have a session on how to fill out the forms. They know what forms go in what envelopes, but they have a lot of questions about filling out the forms. And at this point, and obviously there's room for editing on this, that would be the training that I would recommend.
Great. So, do we need any, board decision on this? Or just, you know, now that we described as,
This is something.
No, yeah, I'm fine. I don't know if we need a board decision on this. I think it's good to, you know, publicly discuss the plan, and then we'll execute basically on those recommendations.
Without objection, I would just suggest we move forward with that.
Yes.
Unless anybody wants to make modifications.
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah, so, without objection. Next item on the agenda is relocation of precinct 204 to Bath Elementary. Precinct 204 is Fairview Heights, and it is particularly the polling place has been Fairview Christian Church on Campbell Avenue for as long as I can remember. I don't know when that first started, but this year was the first year in which Fairview Christian was my individual responsibility. Each of us on the electoral board take responsibility for 6 of the local precincts to inspect them beforehand for ADA compliance and condition and everything, and then visit them on election day. This is my first year at Fairview Christian, and I found that it's an older building and not very handicap accessible in a variety of ways. It's a principal parking used by voters. As I heard on election day, requires climbing a short flight of steps. Crossing the street, climbing a short flight of steps to get up the level of the door to the entryway that's used. There's about a 3-inch foundation or lift that has to be stepped up. That door. There is a parking area to one side of the church, the downhill side, is supposed to be indicated to be available for handicap parking, but it is on a slope. The sidewalk that connects it to the building is on a slope initially, and so in those ways, it's just not ADA friendly, and so I particularly worked since the election to find, since that inspection in September, to find an alternative location. Initially, it looked like Fairview Community Center on Campbell Avenue would be attractive. It's the city, but they also, we discovered, had programming that they do, which we use in the area, which increases on election days. So we had to interrupt and displace those activities in order to be located there. And then more recently, I looked at the Bath Elementary School, which is not in the precinct 204, but is right next to it. The code of Virginia allows us to locating a polling place within a precinct or within a mile of that precinct borders. Bath Elementary is at most 200 yards outside of the precinct. And I inspected the building with the school deputy superintendent for the building operations, with the street road closure, and with the school principal, and I think it's a very functional building for us. The gymnasium is in the back of the building. It has 2 entrances onto a parking lot, which is directly outside. And the gymnasium was big, would be, I think, ideal for parking access below parking lot, entry. The two doors do have, again, it's a 3-inch foundation of width underneath the entry doors. But, 3 voters said that is something that city schools could either do as a temporary ramp or should even consider a permanent ramp, which I think they should anyway. Those are should be acceptable. And, the restrooms are acceptable, it's got everything that needs there. And, the, city school system is fine with us using it, principal fine with it. So that is, my proposal today. The process for making a change is that we have to petition city council, which makes the decision on polling place locations. And they go through a process and approval by the city council, and they go to the board of elections and
The Attorney General.
to the office of the Attorney General to make sure that there's no civil rights or federal disagreement, federal law impacts. So all that process takes time. It's unclear that we can have all that accomplished by the March primary, but I think we can do our best to try to push the process along. And the city attorneys indicated that city council could consider this on December as well. Next week, they will, it's my motion today that the electoral board will approve a recommendation to city council that we move the polling place for 204 precinct to that. Is there any discussion?
Just for people who haven't been to Bath Elementary, I don't think you can get to Bath Elementary without going through 204. Because I mean, the bridge over railroad track, there's no back exit. So you have to go through 203 to get into it, even though it's physically located in 204. And it is a very large parking space. You may have to do some signage back here, but I have not been inside it. School was in session, so I just drove around it. But it looks like a very doable location and certainly alleviates one of the.
And the Code of Virginia doesn't encourage us to use public buildings for polling places, which is qualified as. One other location was suggested to us as well is that Department of Transportation has a meeting and operations facility at the top of Campbell Avenue just before you enter Campbell County. Just on the other side of the 460, and I talked to the deputy superintendent of that facility, and it's not really a room. They have an enormous training conference room, but it's not available to the public. There's security, it's full tables and chairs that we have to move down. So it's not going to take much either. So I think this is the best solution. And Steve mentioned is the only access to the or I think it's a good deal for us. Okay, any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is adopted, and then we'll recommend that to city council. 2 more items then. He wanted to talk about the holiday schedule for staff. And we also wanted to talk, I wanted to talk about the checking process.
Dan let us know that a lot of the city holidays, when they would normally be off because we have 3 elections next year. And they probably don't get to take any of the city holidays prior to July 4th because they have to be working. And I don't know whether we need to make this as a motion or just a sense of the board. For those holidays that the registrar and his staff have to work, that they be allowed to take a comp day at an appropriate time to suit their schedule and not interfere with their work in the office.
I fully agree with the sentiment. Betty, do you have any comment? well, then I think you hear the sentiment of the
Yep.
sense of the board that yes, you should make use of comp time so that you're not beating yourself to death.
Yep, and I'll make sure they get their time off somehow. We'll figure it out somehow.
And that applies to you as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. The check-in process for precinct chiefs, I noticed was slow. There are a variety of factors that consider to that on election night in November. It took many chiefs more than an hour after they arrived to be interviewed by a deputy registrar to sort of check in on the materials and he asked questions about everything. And it was my suggestion today that we should have 2 deputy registrars checking the chief rather than just 1. So I don't know. I think that's entirely down within your purview, but I just wanted to see if there were any concerns about that.
No, that's fine. We'll take that recommendation and we'll work on that. If there's other ways to address it or other pieces that come into it as we talk about how to do it, we'll also factor those in. But
Nancy's.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I'll let you go first.
I just had another recommendation that I would also like to bring. We had a lot of new chiefs and a lot of them kind of wanted to like debrief. And I completely understood that. And it's a little hard to like be like, I can't hear about it right now, but would love to. So I would like to also recommend maybe us being able to schedule or offer with them if they would like to come in and do a debrief with staff or, just kind of conclude their thoughts of their day, that maybe we offer that at a separate time. So they still feel heard and seen, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on election night.
Nancy, did you have a comment as well?
The only suggestion I'll probably say about having both of us is are we gonna have extra help in the office? Because if that's gonna take both of us to do, we need extra help. If it's not provided, then we're gonna come into the same thing that we did before, like voters do not know where they're going.
This is all on election night, just when the equipment's coming back in, that's the only time.
Yeah.
That's all that happened during the time. Yeah. From, let's see. Answering phones,
Yeah.
telling people that they missed the deadline and all that. So,
We had an amazing number of people come in on election day to vote in our office. And we had to tell people over and over again, I'm sorry, early voting, which was here, up until the 4th, is no longer available here. You'll need to go to your precinct. So I don't know, we had 100 people. It was just an enormous number of people that came in to vote and tell them where to go.
and then we still had election officers coming into our side, and didn't know, what they were supposed to do, either to wait or do anything else.
Yeah, so typically we use election officers for our temporary staff. So of course, election officers are all busy that day. So we have to think about maybe how to arrange for some additional help that night. Yeah.
The thing that I was going to address Nancy's concern, basically is the question, does it have to be the registrar or a deputy registrar? Could we have some election officers trained so that after they get done in their precinct, they come over and help with check-in? Same way we have some election officers at the office during the day, we're not seeing those, depending upon how they are otherwise assigned that day, we come in and help with the check-in process. And quite frankly, I have no problem, unless we're in the middle of trying to report something with having an electoral board member there, the chief needs to debrief.
And
There are a lot of little things that we
Yeah.
can do that situation like that.
And also with the electoral board, also help out with that part. So that way it takes some pressure off of that. Because
Yeah.
if one deputy is actually in the office and be able to answer the phone and all that, Julie would actually have a little bit more help by you guys to help sort things. Because I know Betty was helping and she was running all over the place with Julie. And Julie's running around with her head cut off. Just to
I
say,
feel like we need more people.
pretty
Yeah,
much.
I agree. I think that's clear. Say something
Can
else?
I answer,
Yeah, sure.
Steve? I think it would be a little bit more accomplishable if maybe we offered it as a position to some election officers, just like we do for early voting, that an option of station might be our office on election day. I'm not quite sure the amount of response I will get if I offer election officers to then work after election day. Again, that's gonna be a really hard sell. I'm totally willing to make it. I just don't know how accomplishable that will be.
But although many times officers of election have said to me in the past, I don't want to work all day, could I just work part of the day? This could be a part day.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah, we might be able to staff it differently. So that's a fair point. Okay.
Okay, so I don't think we need any board action on that.
Okay.
That discussion.
Yep. Thank you.
I think we've arrived at the public comment section of the agenda. Is there anyone in the public that would like to, any comments for us? Yeah, yeah, could you stand at a, microphone without?
I am Jeff Rosner, and I am the authorized representative and voter protection liaison for the Lynchburg Democratic Committee. I have two topics. The first is electoral mail. And of course, the registrar has already discussed some of the problems with electoral mail in his report. The last meeting I mentioned, and another example, some outgoing absentee ballots sitting in the post office in the Richmond area for about 2 weeks. And let me give just one more example. An absentee ballot that was received after election day, and it, according to the voter, had been mailed about 2 weeks before election day. What can be done about it? Of course, the electoral board and registrar do not control the postal service. However, one way to address these problems would be to have a later deadline for absentee ballots received after election day. That would, of course, require legislation. But I would like to ask if the electoral board and or the registrar could suggest such a change to our local legislators and to the state board of elections. Okay, on another topic, this has to do with questions I have about a test for election officer applicants. And my information on this comes, and I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it comes from a complaint that was filed in November by Lynchburg election officer with the State Board of Elections. I have just two questions on the test, but I should also mention that there are other issues in the complaint that the board should discuss publicly. All right, on the test, the complaint includes these two statements. One, quote, in order for someone to be an election officer for fall 2023, there was a requirement of passing a test with a grade of 80% before initial EO training, unquote. The other statement in the complaint is, quote, this requirement was implemented by this year's newly appointed electoral board, unquote. Now, this kind of a test has never been mentioned at board meetings, and our chair was never informed about it before the complaint was made. The Democratic Committee has been asked to recruit election officers, and knowing about the test would have helped in that recruitment. So my questions are two of these. Number one, are either or both of the statements in the complaint that I've quoted, are they correct? Second, if either or both are correct, why has there been no mention of the test at electoral board meetings? Thank you.
Is there any other public comments? Carl,
Doesn't come with a gun.
you can speak up loud.
Yeah, I'm a little louder, yeah. Just a couple of things. Could a citizen, maybe it's on the website, I'm not sure, receive that statistical registration report in a hard copy? The only reason I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, yep.
What else is that? In relation to what Jeff just mentioned about that test. I really feel that we may need to approach legislators concerning that test. The poll tax was, the literacy test was revoked years ago. And this is an option of something like that because it prohibits certain people from working. And I hate to say that people don't have a reading capability, but a lot of people don't. It's not that they're not good people, not that they're honest people, because they are. But it is a shame when people can't work because they can't pass a certain level of a test. A certain level of a test. 50% would be by 8% without wage. That's all. Oh, there was one other thing. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that you would be stepping down after this term. Your replacement, would that person automatically be the new chair of this committee?
The Code of Virginia requires the chair and the secretary of the board to be of different parties.
Okay.
And it could be, unless that is waived by the members in question in writing. So, yeah, normally it would be, they could switch, the new person could be with, chair or the secretary. Betty or Dan, do you want to address the test question?
When we were doing our planning for how to prepare our election officers for the election, there were several levels of training. And the Department of Elections updated their online quiz information, and it comes with a little quiz at the end, and that's what you're talking about. And they're the ones who made up those questions. They teach you the information first, and then they ask you the question. The test can be taken over and over. It was never stated that it was a requirement to be an election officer. It was just thrown out there to be like a basic introduction to people who were getting involved in elections for the first time. And that way, when they came to our in-person sessions, they already knew some of the lingo, they knew the process, they knew the equipment, stuff like that. The board, when we got together for a public meeting to discuss our training for election officers, we all agreed that that would just sort of be our starting point. And not everybody did it. I was the one who would send the results. Not everybody did it. Not everybody was an election officer, but it was thrown out there for a place to start. So does that answer your question?
So I think the point to be raised here is that no one was denied being an election officer for failing that test.
Or just for not even taking it at all. And nobody did fail. Everybody got over it 80%, and maybe the ones I didn't hear from didn't, but they still were election officers.
And yes, the registrar's report will be on the website. I usually post it after the meeting, so you're welcome to go on the city website and look at that.
Thank you, Mo.
I just wanted to, make a suggestion, which might not work, but in terms of, we're trying to save money on postage for return ballots, in the case where, the vendor can't print the, return thing on the envelope, which you only get charged for that if it's actually mailed back, right? If that's not doable, maybe you might want to look at the cost of putting a slip of paper or a notification or something in the package to go to the voter, suggesting, or maybe more than suggesting, encouraging them to drop the ballot off the registrar's office drop box instead of depending on the mail, because based on the fact that there's problems with the mail, and they don't, and so like the voter should want to avoid having the ballot not being counted. So they can avoid that, they can avoid that possibility if they just go drop it off. So, I mean, maybe a lot of people would be encouraged to actually do that and save some money too. Oh, and also, I was wondering when Carl was talking about keeping people from voting. I think Carl mentioned something about not being able to read well, and I think that we need to. It means it's the first time I was a chief, but I don't see how anybody who can't read well could perform the job as an election officer. It's just like I just don't know how it can possibly do that.
Thank you, Peter. Peter's suggestion about the voters about returning with ballots drop boxes, I think it's useful. Reminds me that some nonprofit fundraiser, but ISD has printed on that envelope. Attach postage and save us $1. That's certain.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I'm not sure if we're allowed to do that because we're supposed to pay for the return postage, but yeah, we could think about some way to encourage people to not use the postal system for multiple reasons. One, for cost, and two, because there's a lack of reliability sometimes. So, and it goes to Jeff's point. Yeah, I was very concerned that I'm getting back, return ballots and also even just undeliverable ballots that we'd sent out all the way up to the very end. I'm thinking, how is it possible that, something was put in the mail system on 9/22 and here I'm sitting here on November 13th and I'm still getting back, oops, we couldn't find this address, or, oh, this person dropped in the mail. Like you said, some of them were 2 weeks before the deadline, at least a week or two before the deadline. And sure enough, they're showing up, after the 13th. So I don't know, Doc, if you want to comment on that, or somebody else about the timeline on that. Canvas ends on the 14th, right? That's the dilemma. So the 13th really is as far as we could have gone this time with, in terms of any deadline. I think in order to extend that deadline, you'd almost have to extend Canvas, because we need to have literally 24 hours or so to actually count the votes that come in, right?
Just to add information to your thinking, we cannot process provisional ballots from people who were sent absentee ballots until after the deadline.
Right.
When absentee ballots have to come back, because we don't know if we're going to receive an absentee ballot from that person who filed a provisional ballot. So it delays everything. If we're back, up, add extra days, and adds extra days to be provisional. It's a set of dominoes. You move one thing, you got a whole bunch of things that follow. So it's a really complicated timeline, and moving one piece moves more than one piece. It moves a bunch of pieces, and it just delays. And people don't like to delay. They want to know what the answer is. They want it now.
Thank you for the comments. I think we're done for this afternoon. I want to thank everyone for attending our meetings this year. We will be back in January. Well, actually, we'll be again in December.
Yeah, more, right.
So more fun. Great. But for today, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
You're not.